I always thought the last day of school was supposed to feel like freedom. Senior year. Finally, we're all getting out. But for me, it was different. I found myself stuck in detention. Honestly, the reason doesn't matter. Just another stupid thing I'd done. The only people left were me and Mr. Garrett, the janitor. He didn't talk much, just gave me that look that said, "You'll learn someday." But that day, the school felt off. Too quiet. As I sat in the cramped, stuffy room, all I could think about was Zach. He was one of the seniors last year who just vanished on his last day. Nobody really talked about it anymore, except for Charlie. Charlie was our class clown, always cracking jokes that fell flat, but he had this wild streak. He had all these crazy theories. Said Zach didn't run away, said the school took him. I laughed it off back then. But today, sitting in detention, it didn't feel like a joke. The halls were empty. The walls seemed closer. Mr. Garrett finally broke the silence. "Clean up your stuff before you leave," he muttered. As I made my way down the empty hallway, I noticed Zach's locker, number 348, was wide open. Nobody had touched it since he disappeared. My stomach tightened. I didn't know why, but I walked over. Inside, there was a crumpled piece of paper. I unfolded it, and there it was. "Stay away!" It was Zach's handwriting. My heart pounded. I shoved the note in my pocket and hurried down the hall. The lights above me started to flicker as I walked toward the exit. At first, I thought nothing of it. Old building, old wiring. But then the flickering followed me. Light by light, the bulbs blinked in rhythm with my steps. That's when I heard it, a loud slam from Zach's locker. I turned around, expecting to see someone, but the hallway was empty. That's when the air around me changed. Cold, freezing cold. I walked faster. The cold followed me, creeping along my spine. My breath came out in white puffs, but it wasn't just the temperature. It felt like something was there with me, like I wasn't alone. I could hear footsteps behind me. I stopped. They stopped. I started again, and so did the steps. Panic set in. I reached the exit doors and pushed hard against them. They didn't budge. Suddenly, I remembered something Zach had said in gym class, weeks before he disappeared. He joked about how the school felt like it was watching him, how the walls seemed alive sometimes. We all laughed it off. But now, standing there with the doors locked and the temperature dropping, his words came rushing back. What if he was right? I tried all the exits. Every single door was locked, every window bolted. I started banging on the doors, yelling for help, but it was useless. My voice barely echoed back at me. The walls seemed to absorb the sound. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadow stretching along the wall, moving toward me. Not a person, something worse, something not human. Suddenly, I heard Mr. Garrett's voice behind me. He looked different, more serious. "You need to leave, now." His voice was shaky, like he knew something I didn't. But when I told him the doors were locked, he shook his head. "This place, it doesn't let go easily." He walked away, disappearing into the shadows, leaving me alone again. I didn't know if he was part of it or just scared. Panic surged through me. I started running down the hall, my sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. The flickering lights above seemed to track my movements, like the school was watching. No matter where I turned, the doors were locked. The cold air clung to me, and I could hear that low, steady breathing again, like the building itself was alive. I slowed down, catching my breath. That's when the shadow stretched along the walls again. It was massive, hulking, and twisted. It wasn't just following me. It was growing, consuming the space around it. The more I moved, the more it seemed to close in on me. I knew then, I wasn't going to get out of here without facing whatever this was. Desperate, I ran into the janitor's closet, slamming the door shut behind me. Inside, I found something strange. Old yearbooks, pictures of past students. As I flipped through them, I started seeing names. Zach's name circled in red, and others. Students I'd never heard of. Were they all taken by this place? I flipped to the back page, and there was my picture, circled in red. It hit me then. The school wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was alive, feeding off students, taking them, absorbing them. Zach wasn't gone. He was part of the walls, the lockers, the foundation. And now it wanted me. I could feel the walls closing in, the air thickening around me. I wasn't going to let it take me without a fight. I grabbed a heavy wrench from the closet and slammed it into the door. The sound echoed through the hallway, but I didn't care. I had to get out, but every hit felt like it was hitting me back. The walls shook and the shadow outside the door grew darker, angrier. I stopped swinging when I heard it, a voice, faint and distorted. "Stay, away." It was Zach. His voice was coming from the walls, from the shadow. He was warning me, but it was too late. The shadow started seeping under the door, curling around my feet like smoke. The shadow had me cornered. My heart raced as I tried to push it back with the wrench, but it went right through. I could feel it pulling me, tugging me into its darkness. My body felt heavy, like the building itself was dragging me down into its depths. My vision blurred as the shadow swallowed me whole. The walls weren't just alive, they were feeding. I could feel my energy draining, my memories slipping away. Zach wasn't gone. He was right there, part of this thing. And now I was too. It was pulling me deeper, making me part of the school. I woke up in the janitor's closet, curled up on the floor. Morning light streamed through the window, but everything felt wrong. My hands trembled as I reached for the note in my pocket, the one from Zach. But it was gone. The closet felt different too, like I wasn't alone. When the teachers found me, they didn't believe a word I said. They thought I had fallen asleep, maybe fainted from exhaustion. I tried to tell them about Zach's locker, about the note, but it was like none of it had ever happened. The locker was closed. The hallways were just hallways. But I knew better. Days passed, and I avoided the school as much as I could, but every time I walked past it, I could hear it. A whisper, low and faint, calling to me. Waiting for the next student, waiting for its next meal. It wouldn't stop until it had what it wanted. One day I saw her in the hallway, a freshman looking lost, staring at Zach's old locker. It was open again. I wanted to yell, to warn her, but the school already had its grip on her. It wasn't over. It would never be over. I shook my head, trying to dispel the fear that clung to me like a shadow. Maybe I was just stressing out, overthinking everything. But deep down, I knew the truth. The school was alive, and it was hungry, and Zach's disappearance was just the beginning. As I walked away, I couldn't help but mutter a lame joke to myself, hoping to lighten the mood. Why did the scarecrow become a janitor? Because he was outstanding in his field. No one laughed, and the joke felt as dumb as ever. But it was all I had left. The school loomed behind me, silent and menacing. I glanced back once more, the whispering starting again. Somewhere deep inside, I hoped Zach was still out there, somewhere, fighting the same battle I was now forced to endure. Story 2. I've always flown under the radar, named Sam Carter, by the way. High school for me was like being a background character in someone else's movie. Average grades, a handful of friends, and just trying to get through without drawing too much attention. Today was supposed to break the monotony. Senior prank day. My best friend, Toby Blake, had been scheming this prank for months. Toby's the prankster type, always finding ways to get us into trouble, but somehow making it look fun. Honestly, he's like a walking, talking firecracker. Not always the brightest spark, but never dull. Today's plan? A fake fire drill during the final bell. Just a bit of harmless chaos to end the year. Or so we thought. We spent the entire last period in the gym setting everything up. Toby had somehow snagged the fire alarm key from his older brother, who's a security guard. I still don't get how he did it, but there he was, grinning like he'd just found the Holy Grail. "You ready for this?" Toby asked, his eyes sparkling with excitement. They won't see it coming." I shrugged, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. I never liked being the center of attention, but Toby thrived on it. It's like he's the sun, and I'm just a planet orbiting quietly around him. The gym was quiet, too quiet. It felt eerie, but I chalked it up to the end-of-year exhaustion. Maybe I just hadn't had enough coffee. As we were setting up, the gym doors slammed shut so hard it echoed through the entire space. Toby and I jumped, exchanging nervous looks. "What the hell was that?" I asked, my voice cracking a bit. Toby just laughed it off. "Probably a draft," he said, though there wasn't any breeze. The air was still, heavy, like it was holding its breath. Not the best draft joke, I know. We shrugged it off and got back to work, but the gym felt off, like we weren't alone. Then, out of nowhere, the scoreboard flickered to life. It hadn't been used all day, but there it was, flashing an impossible score. 0-666. Toby smirked, but I could see the unease in his eyes. "Someone's messing with us," he muttered, but I wasn't so sure. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and for the first time, I felt truly watched. That's when the lights started flickering. At first, it was subtle, just a few bulbs twitching, but soon the whole gym was pulsing like a heartbeat, on and off, on and off. We froze, listening. Then we heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, like someone was walking through the gym. But we were alone. Toby. "Let's go," I urged, but he was too stubborn, too curious. The footsteps reminded me of something I'd heard before. Every school has its ghost stories, and ours was no different. Coach Davis, the guy who'd lost it after losing the championship game years ago, was the star of our school's favorite haunted tale. They said he locked himself in the gym, went mad, and never came out. Some claimed to have seen his ghost pacing the gym late at night. I never believed it. But now, I wasn't so sure. Then came the whistle. Sharp, shrill, and too close for comfort. It echoed through the gym, sending a chill down my spine. Toby, usually fearless, went pale. I glanced around, sure I'd see someone, but there was nothing. Just empty bleachers and the dim flicker of lights. That's when I saw it. A shadow, tall and broad-shouldered, moving between the bleachers. I turned, and it was gone. But I knew what I saw. Toby, though, tried to laugh it off. "It's just a prank, right?" he said, voice shaky. But the bell rang then, the final bell, loud and wrong, distorted like it was coming from somewhere deep in the gym's guts. The scoreboard flickered again. 66660. "We need to leave," I whispered, but the doors wouldn't budge. We were trapped. I ran to the doors, yanking at them, but they wouldn't move. It was like they were welded shut. Toby was breathing hard, pacing in circles, trying to stay calm. "It's just a joke, Sam. Someone's messing with us." But I could see the fear in his eyes. He didn't believe his own words. Then we saw him. Coach Davis. But he wasn't just a shadow this time. He was real. His eyes hollow, face twisted with something far worse than anger. He was pacing the court like he was reliving that final game. I backed up, pulling Toby with me, but Coach's whistle blew again, each sharp note in time with his steps. The gym felt colder with every step he took. The scoreboard buzzed again, flashing 66060 like it was keeping score of something we didn't understand. And that's when I realized we were the players. Toby was shaking now. "This can't be real," he kept muttering, eyes darting around the gym, looking for a way out. But there wasn't one. Coach Davis was closing in, his gaze locked on Toby, like he was targeting him specifically. "Toby, we need to move," I yelled, but he couldn't. His legs buckled under him and he collapsed, gasping for breath. The air around us had gotten heavy, suffocating. I tried to drag him, but it was like I was moving through thick water. Coach Davis stopped in front of Toby, his whistle still blowing in a sick rhythm. I could feel the walls closing in, the gym warping around us. It wasn't just a haunting anymore. We were in Coach's world now, his game. Toby's eyes went wide with terror, and for a moment, I thought I saw him cry. Then, in an instant, Toby was gone. Coach didn't even touch him. He just stood there, staring down at him as Toby's body went limp, collapsing like a rag doll. His eyes were open, staring, but empty. "Toby!" I screamed, shaking him, but he didn't move. I heard the final blow of Coach's whistle like a victory call, and the gym went dark. I don't remember how I made it out of that gym. I just remember running. The doors flew open suddenly, and I stumbled out into the cold morning air, breathless, confused, and alone. My mind was a blur. Toby was still in there. He had to be. The next morning, the school was buzzing with the news. Toby had been found in the gym, clutching a basketball, frozen in the same position I'd last seen him. The doctors said it was a heart attack, but I knew the truth. Coach got him. After that, I couldn't shake the feeling that Coach Davis was still out there, waiting. Every time I heard a whistle, my blood ran cold. And every time the final bell rang, I froze, expecting to see his shadow waiting for me. Toby's funeral was packed, but I felt alone. I stood by his grave, staring at the tombstone, wondering if anyone would believe me, if anyone else knew what really happened in that gym. The weight of it was too much. It crushed me. I tried to make a joke to lighten the mood, but all that came out was, "Guess Toby really scored big in the afterlife, huh?" It fell flat, just like my feelings. Months later, I started hearing it again. The whistle. Late at night, when the world was quiet, it would cut through the silence, sharp and cold. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then I realized it wasn't going away. One night, I woke to the sound of the final bell. It echoed in my head, distorted just like it had been in the gym. My heart pounded as I looked out my window. There on the street stood Coach Davis, his figure illuminated by the flickering streetlights. He was waiting for me. I don't know what he wants. Maybe he's waiting for me to join the game, to take Toby's place. But one thing's for sure. I'm not going back to that gym. Not ever. I'll hear that final bell again, but this time, I'll be ready. As I sit here writing this, the whistle seems to be blowing in my mind, and the final bell rings softly in the distance. I glance around, half expecting to see Coach's shadow lurking in the corners. But all I see is my empty room, and the lingering fear that maybe, just maybe, the game isn't over yet. And if it isn't, I guess I'll just have to keep playing until the final bell truly rings. Story 3. Graduation day should have been the best day of high school. Instead, it felt like stepping into a horror movie. I never thought my last day would turn out like this. But here I was, stuck in Mr. Harris's final math class. Mr. Harris was the kind of teacher who clung to old-fashioned ways. He had graying hair that never quite sat right, glasses that always seemed to slide down his nose, and a stare that made you uneasy. Nobody liked him much, not because he was mean, but because he was just off. I always wondered what was going on in that old man's head. Maybe it was the rumors. Some said he used to work at a mental hospital before becoming a teacher. Dark stories about experiments and accidents that left him scarred. I never paid much attention to them until today. I sat at my usual spot next to Jake. Jake was the guy who could make a joke out of anything, even if it wasn't funny. Today, he whispered, "One last math problem, and we're free." I rolled my eyes, trying to lighten the mood. Yeah, because math problems are the best way to celebrate freedom. Beside me, Sarah was unusually quiet. She was always the shy one, keeping to herself and rarely speaking up. Today, though, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. I nudged her, hoping to break the tension. She muttered, "I don't like this. Something feels wrong." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Mr. Harris was droning on about some complicated equation that none of us cared about. My mind wandered, thinking about how ridiculous it was that our last day was spent solving for X instead of partying. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Just a quick blink, but it was enough to make everyone stop and stare around the room. When the lights came back, Sarah was looking straight at me, her eyes wide and pale. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I shook my head. "Hear what?" but she didn't respond. Her face turned even paler, and she just sat back down, trembling. The lights flickered again. This time, it wasn't just Sarah. The entire class was staring at me, their eyes locked on mine like I'd done something terribly wrong. Jake tried to laugh it off, saying, "Man, this is weird," but no one else reacted. They just kept staring, no blinking, no moving. My stomach twisted with unease. I raised my hand, hoping to address the strange behavior. "Mr. Harris, something's wrong," I said. He turned slowly, that creepy smile spreading across his face. "Class dismissed," he said, as if everything was perfectly normal. But when I looked around, nobody moved. They were all frozen in their seats, eyes still glazed over, like they weren't even alive. Panic set in. I stood up, thinking this was some kind of sick joke, but then I heard it. A faint whispering, like the wind blowing through cracks in the windows. I looked around, but nobody else seemed to notice. The whispers grew louder, coming from the shadows in the corners of the room. It felt like the darkness was alive, moving toward us. I backed up toward the door, but the whispering crawled into my head, making it hard to think straight. Suddenly, Jake's body jerked forward. His hands slammed onto the desk, and his head snapped up. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Just a long, low groan that didn't sound human. I froze, watching as his arms moved unnaturally, like they were being pulled by invisible strings. Then Sarah started twisting, her body moving in the same jerky, puppet-like way. One by one, the rest of the class followed, each person losing control over their own movements. The shadows in the room pulsed and grew darker, stretching toward the students. They slid between the desks, wrapping around my classmates like living things. The room seemed to warp, the walls closing in and the desks melting into strange shapes. My heart pounded, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I had to get out. Mr. Harris turned to me, his eyes now completely dark, devoid of any light. "They're ready now," he said in a voice so low it sent shivers down my spine. I realized then that this wasn't just a math class. We weren't students anymore. We were part of some dark plan, and Harris was the mastermind behind it all. A flash of memory hit me. Those old rumors about Mr. Harris. He had always been a bit strange, but I never believed the stories about him doing experiments or being involved in some accident. Now it was all too clear. Harris stepped forward, his voice growing louder. "I've been preparing them," he declared, gesturing to the frozen class. "Preparing you. The final lesson is about to begin." My stomach dropped. This wasn't just a class anymore. It was a ritual, and we were the sacrifices. I tried to back away, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I snapped out of my paralysis and bolted for the door. My heart raced as I reached for the handle, but it was ice cold, unyielding. I pulled with all my strength, but the door wouldn't budge. I banged on it, screaming for help, but no one came. Behind me, I could hear the class groaning, their voices rising in a horrible chorus. Desperate, I turned back. The room had changed. The walls were closing in. The desks twisted into bizarre shapes, and the shadows had completely consumed the students. Mr. Harris stood there, watching me with that sick smile. "You can't leave," he whispered. "Not until the lesson is over." Jake, my best friend, twisted toward me, his face contorted in pain. "Help me," he gasped, but his voice was distorted, not his own. I rushed toward him, but as soon as I got close, his body jerked backward, slamming against the wall. His eyes rolled back, and his body went limp. Sarah was next. Her head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with terror. "Please," she mouthed, but before I could move, the shadows swallowed her whole. Her seat was empty. I was alone now, the only one left standing as the whispering grew louder, almost deafening. It hit me then. This wasn't an accident. Harris had been preparing us for this all year, slipping something dark into his lessons, some kind of spell. Now it was too late. We were trapped in his twisted game, and the only way out was to finish the lesson. I turned to Harris, rage and fear boiling inside me. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted. He just smiled. "To teach you," he replied, To teach you the truth. I didn't know what he meant, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to stick around to find out. In a desperate move, I grabbed a chair and smashed it against the window. The glass shattered, and I climbed out, scraping my hands on the broken shards. I fell to the ground outside, panting, but I didn't stop running. I didn't look back. I couldn't. When I finally stopped, I was far from the school. I turned around, expecting to see the building in flames or collapsing, but it just stood there, silent, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I knew what was inside. Weeks later, I still can't shake the feeling. Sometimes when I drive past the school, I swear I can hear the whispering, the darkness. The lesson isn't over. Not for me, not for anyone who was there. It's still waiting, pulling at me, daring me to come back. And one day, I might have to.